Seasonal Affective Disorder, or SAD, is more common in latitudes further from the equator. Within the United States, SAD is rare in Florida, more common in mid-Atlantic states, and most common in the northern U.S. or Canada. One study using questionnaires estimated an incidence of SAD of only 1% in Florida, around 5% at the latitude of New York, and around 10% at the latitude of New Hampshire.
Welcome to the Thrivology Lab podcast, where we explore the science, philosophy, and practice of thriving. Our goal is to help you create a happier and healthier life through education, application, and transformation. Your co-hosts on this journey are Neil Utterback, that's me.
And Phil Dunwoody, that's me. Neil and I are both on the faculty at Juniata College, where we teach courses to promote human thriving and well-being. Before we get started, Neil, where can people find us?
Please subscribe to Thrivology Lab on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a comment or question on YouTube, and we will be sure to respond. And be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You can also reach out with questions or comments at thrivologylab@gmail.com.
So in today's episode, we are talking about seasonal affective disorder, which we will refer to as SAD throughout the episode. We're going to talk about how common it is, some differences we see by gender as well as location where you live, what we think causes SAD, some evolutionary explanations, as well as what we know about effective treatment. And Neil and I decided to do this episode because it's January here in Pennsylvania where we're recording this. And for those of you who don't know, in the Northeast, January and February are the two coldest months. They're particularly cold, dark, and not a lot of sunshine. Especially this area of central Pennsylvania where we live, where the mountains, has a lot of cloud cover. And so if you like gray, we do gray really well.
We do really well, yeah.
Through this time of year. And so, whether you call it the winter blues or SAD, it's a common thing that people deal with in the winter. And so we thought it would be a good time to do an episode on this a little bit. Partially because this is something that you and I, talk about, and like, how do we each cope with it? We both like to be outside in the sun. You, more than I, really want it to be warm when you're out,
Yeah, I like, even right now, we're getting ready. Thankfully, tomorrow Phil and I head to Costa Rica, thankfully, with our students. But it could not, for me, come at a better time because I feel it it's the cold. I feel like it's been particularly cold this year, but also particularly gray. And that just, it bums me out. I just feel bummed out.
Right. Right, and that is not uncommon. Right, for those of you who are feeling that is actually quite normal. And so I think that's like one of the things that is helpful is to realize, it's not just me. There isn't something wrong with me, right?
Right.
So from the beginning, I think we should put that out there.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with me. And I was also one of those people, when I went to school in Indiana. I'd lived in New York for nearly 10 years. And certainly I've been around, for some reason, around winter more than I would otherwise like to be. And we were talking about this before we started recording, I didn't notice it quite so much probably in my teens or 20s, but certainly by my 30s and 40s, I was like, this is something's going on. And, SAD, or seasonal affective disorder, started bubbling up in sort of the discourse, but it was one of those things that I'd be like, that's not a real thing. I'm just there's something wrong with me. I think just to double down on what you just said, that what we're going to try to present here is that, as we have talked about in many of these domains, is that much of our modern world has been engineered against our natural evolutionary states, that what we evolved to do. And so what we're trying to do is figure out what some of the problems are and how can we sort of reverse engineer nature, as it were, back into our lives. So
yeah, exactly. So before we get into all that, what is seasonal affective disorder when we use that SAD?
SAD. Appropriately. named. So, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, SAD is a type of depression characterized by a recurrent seasonal pattern with symptoms lasting about 4 to 5 months out of the year. The signs and symptoms of SAD include those associated with depression as well as disorder-specific symptoms that differ for winter versus summer pattern SAD. And this was something I definitely didn't know, and I guess we're not going to go deep into sort of the spring and summer side of this, but a person can experience sort of spring and summer seasonal affect and the symptoms can be similar. And some of those symptoms include persistent sadness, anxious or feeling of emptiness, hopelessness, pessimism, irritability, frustration, restlessness. I certainly feel restless. I feel impatient a lot, loss of interest or pleasure in hobbies, decreased energy, fatigue, or feeling slowing down. That I certainly experience. I just feel like bummed out. My energy levels are completely dipped. Difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions, and changes in sleep, appetite, and experiences in changing weight because of some of those things as well.
Yeah, I had also always associated SAD with winter months and didn't realize that there were people who actually experience a similar thing in the summer. Maybe ski bums.
Right. Yeah.
That's harder for me to wrap my head around just because personally I totally get the winter part. You know, when I really like to go outside and exercise, and a lot of times in the winter you get home, it's dark. It's not only just cold, it's dark, and I don't mind it cold so much as long as I can see, but to go out when it's cold and dark, that really gets hard.
Well, we're going to talk about some of the evolutionary stuff here too, but I've always been amazed at we'll talk about this in more detail, but when peoples have settled in tundra area, what
why?
Why were you there? Just walk south, my friend. Keep migrating. Yeah. So, how common is this SAD?
So first, I read through a lot of different literature trying to get a sense of prevalence on this, and like so many things, it depends on how you measure it. And are you talking kind of clinical seasonal affective disorder, where it's actually diagnosed, or are you just talking about SAD-like symptoms, what we might call winter blues, that are not quite at the point of being clinically diagnosable as SAD, right? So there are big differences there. But just to give you some range, the quote we started with, this is from the Yale Winter Depression Research Clinic, and I'm going to read that again here with a little more information. SAD is more common in latitudes further from the equator. Within the United States, SAD is rare in Florida, more common in mid-Atlantic states, and most common in the northern U.S. or Canada. One study using questionnaires estimated an incidence of SAD of 1% in Florida, around 5% at the latitude of New York, and around 10% at the latitude of New Hampshire. Some patients report that they did not have trouble with the winter when they lived in southerly latitudes, but did have significant seasonal symptoms when they moved further north. SAD is clearly more common in women than men. Most estimates suggest that SAD is 2 to 4 times more common in women than men. So to kind of unpack that a little bit, and this fits with kind of what I read in different places, that you'll find the prevalence of SAD in terms of something that might be diagnosable as 1 to 10%. Depending on where you live, depending on gender. I thought it was interesting that women tend to be much more likely to experience SAD than men. But you'll actually see, if you kind of loosen up the criteria and say, well, how many of you just feel a little less energetic, maybe put on a little bit more weight, might have some sleep issues in the winter, the number jumps to most people, actually. So this is from also from the Yale Winter Depression Research Clinic. When questionnaires are distributed to samples of people at large, about 90% of individuals report changes in energy, mood, sleep, appetite, and or weight in the winter. Seasonal changes are normal in human beings living away from the equator. Nature seems to have intended human beings to slow down in the winter seasons. And so I thought that was pretty fascinating. This suggests kind of what you're saying. This is normal. It's we resonate with our environment, and when it is colder and there's less light, it seems that maybe, nature, I don't want to use the word intended, but, that we evolve to be less active in the winter months.
Right. And I think what that speaks to me is that it's not just external environmental, but it's that sort of relationship between my metabolic, my biology, my physiology, my psychology. All of it is in synergy with nature. Like, it's not just like I just don't like it when it's gray. No, there's something actually happening evolutionarily, perhaps, that is causing this, and it's more extreme in other people. But the prevalence is that humans have some condition about this related to this seasonal change.
Yeah, and that most people experience this, and this is kind of how, in general, in psychology or psychiatry, you tend to call something a disorder when it is at the point where it seems to disrupt your ability to function in life, right? And so we all feel sad at times, we all feel anxious at times, but at what point are you clinically depressed or clinically anxious? It tends to be, well, some of it is norm referenced. In other words, you're experiencing it much more than other people, and it's interfering with your ability to function at work or with your family or to enjoy life, right? And at that point is when they tend to label things a disorder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, I think, one of the things in sort of our next little bullet I was going to push back on is, like, we're not necessarily talking today about sort of that clinical state. Like, if that's something that probably, some of our treatment recommendations aren't probably going to help a lot with. There's something else deeper going on. But for the other 90% of us who have some fluctuation and experience this, knowing that for us, it's not a disorder, but it is a natural condition that much of our world might not be engineered to support, and that we might have to be a little more intentional about some things in our behaviors and our lifestyles to combat that as well.
Maybe our society is disordered.
Right. Yes.
Because it
right.
expects us to act the same in winter that we do in summer, and it's clear that not only do humans not do that, primates in general don't do that.
Right, right. Well, and so, before we started recording, I told you yesterday I got my hair cut, and my stylist was talking. She was having this, and she actually brought it up, and I was like, "Oh, we're doing this podcast," and I said, and she was asking me, like, "Are you still on winter break?" And I said, "Yes, but isn't it interesting? Like, we have, for us as academics." Sounds a bit like a humble brag, but we get like almost 3 months in the summer off, but we only get a month off in the winter. Like, that really should be flipped. Like, I should have like ample time off so I can just, what we're going to talk about is hibernate or semi-hibernate. And then summer, I don't need that much break because the sun is beautiful. I can get out during the workday. It's all fine. I need like 3 months where I can either hibernate or escape completely.
Right. So if this is so normal, it seems to be something that most humans experience, and even other primates. What's the evolutionary explanation here? What's going on?
So a couple of things we're going to get into are controversial within sort of anthropological circles. Because we just
controversy,
right? Because we just don't have a lot of evidence. But we have enough evidence to suggest that something might be going on. So we know that most of our time as humans on the planet was spent as hunter-gatherers. Phil and I have talked about this a ton. And that in that time, we were in these sort of small groups, tribes that were nomadic or semi-nomadic. And part of that migration effect, was absolutely following herd patterns. We were following other animals. We're also just following nature. So it doesn't behoove me to stick around if all the fruits and vegetables are dried up and all the animals have left. Why am I going to stick around? And it's cold, it's miserable. Let me move. So I follow that. So at least, and even in those peoples that were still sort of in very cold climates, we still see them at least moving down out of higher altitudes where it was colder, even just some fluctuation in that. And so, but then this slowing effect. So there's this migration effect, and I'll come back to that in a second too, because modern life doesn't really support that unless you're some of the sort of so-called snowbirds like my parents were trying to be, where they lived in Indiana and until the winter months, and then they went down to Florida, right? That's actually a great migrational pattern. That makes total sense.
I could buy into that.
I could buy into that.
New Orleans. I'm going to go to New Orleans and get some jazz culture.
But in terms of like hibernation or something like hibernation, we actually have some recent archaeological evidence from the Cima de los Huesos. Phil and I are actually going to start taking Spanish this spring, so if I've mispronounced that, forgive me, I'll do better in the spring. Cima de los Huesos is the pit of bones in Spain that may suggest that humans had a hibernation or something like it cycle some 400,000 years ago. And this largely comes from the paleoanthropologists Juan Luis Arzuaga and Antonis Bartziocas. They published an article, Hibernation in Hominins from Atapuerca, Spain, 500,000 years ago. This was in 2020. And they noticed that in this pit of bones, a lot of the fossilized bones had lesions on it. And the lesions suggested to them that those people had found themselves in what they write, quote, in metabolic states that help them survive for long periods of time in frigid conditions with limited supplies of food and enough stores of body fat. Now, they come just short of saying humans hibernated, but that sure sounds a lot like a form of hibernation, right? So, obviously this is controversial because we don't see this a lot in sort of contemporary humans, but again, contemporary life doesn't really allow for that.
Right. I did look up some about what other primates tend to do.
Right.
And one of the things, because that's always a good way to kind of look at human evolution, what do other primates do? And first, the majority of them are in warm climates.
Right.
I mean, there are some that live in more winter climates, but the majority of them are fairly warm climates. And those that do live in areas where there is, what we might call a winter, they do pack on weight, they reduce activity, and they huddle. They spend a lot of time sitting close to each other to kind of share body heat, not moving, right? So they pack on, so this is... I'm not sure what the official definition of hibernation is, but you might say hibernation-like behavior. Certainly consistent with some of what we're seeing in humans. Reduced activity. Let's get together and share body heat. Right.
Well, and that immediately there is in northwestern Russia. I don't have exact dates on this. I think up to maybe now, certainly within the 20th century, there was again, sorry for the pronunciation, the Sokov government. It's a city-state in northwestern Russia. There were peasants, and they chronically found themselves in sort of a food scarcity during winter. So they developed a habit called Lotska, which families would gather together in a home and do exactly what you just said. They would bake and store like bread in the fall, store it, have their water, and then when they begin this Lotska tradition, they would gather all, sleep around this fire. They'd wake once a day to have some bread, have some water, tend to the fire, and then they went right back to sleep.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, I had no idea.
So, I mean, again, is that like bears hibernating? No, but it's very similar. Yeah. Right. It's as you said, like a hibernation-like.
Yeah. Conservation of energy.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I don't, we were talking about this sort of gender differences. And one of the other things we see, and we see this in other animals as well, bears included, that like part of this, comes from researcher Eagles in 2004, called this sort of attenuated hibernation, which is actually sort of an adaptive behavior to conserve energy, but also to help sort of pregnancies and help sort of bonding and sexual success. Mm-hmm. So, if part of what you feel, like you see this in the fall, right? This sort of, I want to get in my cozy sweater and I want to cuddle on the couch and I want to have my pumpkin spice latte. Well, that's also, it's partly seasonal, but also that desire to sort of cuddle and bond would lead to sort of sexual success during winter, because what else am I going to do, right? And then I have my baby in the warmer months for more success, right? It makes sort of birth success seem more like, I don't want to have a baby in February, right? That's going to be rough. It's going to be hard, right? Yeah. If I'm also trying to find food for myself and I've got this newborn, that's harder. And not that, and sort of modern life allows all kinds of things, and not that people didn't have babies in February and, Paleolithic, wherever, but it makes more sense why we would have these sort of feelings of wanting to sort of cuddle around a fire and be good in the fall and then get really sleepy and lethargic in the winter, such that we get this sort of, they call it hypomania, the spring. I'm like, oh, spring, I want to just get out and I want to do all that sort of that excitement. All of that makes, I think, seasonal sense when you think of it from an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah. And even if you just think of, going back before the advent of, let's say, electricity, mm-hmm. Or, further than that, but if you sleep mainly when it's dark, you're going to be sleeping a lot more in the winter.
Right.
I mean, at a very simple level, and you're going to be awake more. So even at just that basic level, mm-hmm. you would expect more activity in the summer.
Yep.
I thought it was interesting. We do see some comorbidity between SAD and some other psychiatric diseases, so the article "Seasonal Sensitivity and Psychiatric Morbidity." A study about seasonal affective disorder highlights a significant link between seasonal changes and increased psychiatric issues, especially seasonal affective disorder, showing higher rates of general psychiatric cases, 36.6%, in SAD patients compared to those without SAD, 3.2%. That's a big difference. Mm. The article finds that there's a statistically significant link between seasonal mood changes and broader psychiatric disturbances, with SAD patients, of course, showing higher rates of psychiatric cases, especially with winter onset SAD. And some of these changes we've talked about: hypersomnia, increased appetite, carb cravings. One of the things we haven't talked a whole lot about is the hypersomnia and people not sleeping well, mm-hmm. right? So on the one hand, we're talking about it makes sense to sleep more in the winter, and some people do that. But some people have more disruption in their sleep pattern. They find it harder to sleep well in the winter. And I actually experienced a little bit of this. And so what do we know about how does this relate to sleep disturbance?
Well, if we go back to our sort of sleep episodes, we talked a lot about sort of the circadian rhythm, which is basically circa about day, about a day. So your body is following about this sort of wake cycle, sleep cycle, following essentially the sun. And, again, to your point, pre-electricity, that was our time clock. Did the sun come up? Okay, I get up. Did the sun go down? I go to sleep. It just doesn't pay a lot to be out too much later than that, right? Once that sort of changes, we get these disruptions because, one of the things that's happening is that the world now is not allowing us to do that. So you're still being expected to follow a chronological clock, not a seasonal clock. And now I'm getting up and it's dark, and I have to stay awake and it's still dark, and it's very disruptive. So the body doesn't sort of know what cue it's supposed to be taking it from, because it's looking for this evolutionary sunlight cue, right? That's what it's saying. This is time to get up, is the sun. That's what's telling me. And if I don't have that and I have to force my body up, that's causing all these disruptions. And then my body doesn't quite know, because one of the things we also talked about was how sunlight resets our internal biological clock, right? So as soon as when you wake up and you wake up with the sunrise, the body is going to start the clock. Now that all kinds of hormonal chemical changes in the body are building up that sort of what we call sleep pressure, so that you want to go to bed about the same time as the sun's going down. You and the sun go down together. But if you don't have those cues, the body doesn't know what chemicals it's supposed to be producing, right? So it can lead to all these disruptions. And one of the things that we keep coming up with, there's a lot of different potential treatments. Again, we're talking about sort of that 90 percentile, that 90% the folks, not the sort of 1% maybe, but even what they call bright light therapy, or BLT. You've probably seen advertisements for happy lights or light boxes or something, that they are by far the most recommended intervention. And they're the least invasive for most people. That it's not a pharmaceutical necessarily. You don't have to, it's not a huge lifestyle change. You get this little thing, put it close to you, set it up, and that may have some pretty significant benefits for you. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, even when you're traveling and crossing time zones, one of the things they recommend is that you get outside early in the morning and you get light, because you get back to that circadian rhythm. Your body is on this 24-hour clock, and when you switch time zones, especially if it's a dramatic switch, it takes a bit for your circadian rhythm to catch up. And one of the things you can do to help your body is to get that light exposure, or when you first get up. And then in the winter, you might not be getting that light exposure. I think that's because it's cold, you might not be going outside. If you're here in central Pennsylvania, it's pretty cloudy and gray. So even if you are going outside, you might not be getting a whole lot of actual light exposure. And this just makes it all harder for your body to know when it's supposed to be sleeping and when it's supposed to be awake.
And one of the things we keep coming back to again and again in this podcast is like how connected all these things are. So if you're not getting the sunlight and your sleep's getting disrupted, it's probably also going to affect your mood, your ability to exercise, your ability to stay focused, like all the other cascade of things that then happen because you didn't get the sunlight, and then your sleep got disrupted, and the sleep didn't regulate all the things it needed to do. Right? You said comorbidities of things that may get exacerbated as well, like weight gain and other things that may happen as a result of that.
Yeah, and in addition to not getting, I'll say, real sunlight exposure in the winter outside, for many of us, we are also then getting inundated with artificial light that's particularly high in the blue light spectrum that happens to reduce the body's production of melatonin. And melatonin is what your body produces to trigger the sleep cycle. Taking melatonin externally, there isn't a whole lot of research that supports the efficacy of that. So, so again, the engineered environments that we live in might not be helping us, because in addition to not getting the early sunlight that my body wants to regulate, I might then late in the evening be on my phone or be in a room with lots of LED lights that are inhibiting my body's production of melatonin.
And again, we should have, as always, put a disclaimer. We're not medical doctors. We're not putting medical advice on this. But even a lot of the over-the-counter melatonin that you get, the quality of that, you don't really know what you're getting. Yeah. And they don't have enough sort of guardrails on that kind of stuff, those kinds of supplements, to mandate that you're getting the kind of thing they're saying. So not that we're saying don't take anything over the counter or even a pharmaceutical, which is I would say a later stage recommendation. I saw that for some more serious cases of SAD, doctors will prescribe metformin, which is sort of the only one that seems to have direct effect on SAD in particular. But I would say, like, before you get to that stage, trying something less invasive like light therapy. If that doesn't work, then go to the keep working down the line. But I think you and I both use a sort of a happy light or some version of that. And I love mine. I love it.
To piggyback on this a little bit, right? Yes, if you're experiencing something that you would consider moderate or severe depression, you should seek professional help, right? Don't take our advice here on our podcast. Yeah. You might find this information helpful, right, in learning about it, but you should definitely be seeing a clinician, or at least talk with your general practitioner about it. But it does seem, in terms of treatment, that the first line, and there's a lot of research suggesting that bright light therapy really does work pretty well. There are nuances to it, in that you should have, these happy lights, right? They need to be about 10,000 lux. That's a lot of light. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty bright light. And the recommendations, the kind of a minimal effective dose seems to be about 20 to 30 minutes of this bright light exposure, specifically early in the morning. So I was having earlier this winter, I just wasn't sleeping as well. I was getting up at night. I was having a hard time falling back to sleep. And so, being the nerds that we are, right? I said, like, okay, what's the literature say? What should I be doing to help regulate my evening sleep? And some of the things we've already talked about, like, okay, like reduce evening bright lights, right? Kind of, if I'm on my phone, it shouldn't be right in front of my face. It should be further away. I could watch TV. That's pretty far away. I shouldn't have a whole lot of lights on in the room. I should try and keep the environment fairly dark. I have also learned some time ago I shouldn't watch news in the evening because, gosh, especially now, it tends it triggers a stress response. And one of the things our stress response does naturally is keep us awake, because your body's telling you there's an emergency. You might want to stay awake rather than sleep. Well, obviously, if you need to sleep in the evening, consider when do you ingest news, and when should you not be ingesting news? And for me, definitely, I should not be ingesting news in the evening.
We talk about caffeine having a half-life. I think I've come to the conclusion that news has a half-life. Like if I'm watching news in the morning, it's 6 hours later, I'm still like, I feel kind of amped up by things, and it needs, I can't watch at night as well. So
that's a good way to think about it. And I did buy a light, a happy light. Looking at the research on it, they say ideally it's like 6 to 18 inches from your face. You're not supposed to stare directly into it, by the way, so don't be doing that. But that's pretty close.
That's close, yeah.
And ideally, it's supposed to be slightly above your eye level. There's something about kind of mimicking what the sun naturally does, which is kind of fall on the bottom part of your retina. And so I got one that sits on my essentially my breakfast table that flexes up, right, and is just slightly above eye level. So in the morning, I eat my oatmeal and I do my Duolingo, my Spanish Duolingo, which has yet to make me fluent, but it's helping at least with basic words. Yeah. And I have the light on for 20, 30 minutes, and that plus some of the other changes, I am having an easier time staying asleep.
Well, we were talking before we started recording, like I had my light here at the office, and so I wasn't really getting it until, by the time I got out of my first class, so probably like 11:30, I wasn't using it until, it's like, why? And based on just this, I was like, I need to take that home and do it with my breakfast, my coffee, as you said. So I'm getting that cue earlier, because probably by 11:30, I've missed an important window for me.
And do you have it set up so that it's,
it's literally in my backpack right now. So
but like in terms of your setup consider, is it, 12, 18 inches from your eyes?
Yeah, here.
Or is it more like 2 feet, right?
Well, it might be sort of 2 feet here. Yeah.
So this light therapy seems to be very effective. Cognitive behavior therapy also seems to be quite helpful. Cognitive, talk therapy as we know it, cognitive behavior therapy. And I was curious as to kind of why that works. And, some of it might be helping you do things like use the bright light therapy, right? Because cognitive behavior therapy, some of that is about changing your thought pattern, some of it is about changing your behavior. Well, if I go into it thinking, well, nothing works, I'm always depressed in the winter, there's no point in doing the light, I'm not even really giving it a chance, right? And so one of the things that cognitive behavior therapy might do would be help me actually try and be more disciplined about using the bright light therapy every morning, and then thinking about my evening routine. And it also focuses a lot on kind of our self-talk, right? And so like if every winter I'm saying, I hate winter, I'm always depressed, I know I'm going to be depressed, you're kind of setting these expectations for yourself that might be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Totally.
And you and I also talked about, like, I don't want to cross over into like gaslighting someone or gaslighting yourself. Like, it is natural to feel less energetic in the winter, but does it have to be as extreme as you're experiencing it? You might be able to move that needle some while still acknowledging that it's a real thing.
Yeah, I definitely think, just speaking for myself, I think it's both and. Like, I think I'm definitely feeling something that is physiological and real, and not that what's in your head, to quote Harry Potter, like, of course it's in your head, it doesn't mean it's not real, but like, that it's also in my head. It's also part of my self-talk. It's also the dread and anticipation. As soon as like, Halloween rolls around, it's like, all right, buckle up, it's coming, here it goes. And like, I've already set myself up for a kind of experience that is real, but I probably, for myself, exacerbated through that sort of anticipation.
That's very common for people who experience SAD, is to have that dread early on as fall is like, oh, here comes winter. And I don't experience that, though I do notice some change in energy and activity in the winter. I'm not as sensitive to that, but I know people like you and others, my spouse in particular, who say that when in the fall they're like, here comes winter, And I can put a pin in it. Like, I love the changing of the trees in the fall. As soon as the leaves have fallen, I'm like, oh no, that's it, we're done. So, yeah, but again, I think that's an important point. Like, some of that is mindset, perspective, and setting yourself up in a particular way. Yeah, and then the third, so we talk bright light therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. The third thing we see that really makes a difference is exercise. And it's hard because we're saying that our natural tendency seems to be to slow down and huddle, and again, not just us, but other primates as well. But yet, regular exercise does seem to help boost mood, and we know it helps with sleep, right? So again, all these things kind of feed each other. Now, when you exercise, of course, matters. You're not supposed to be exercising right before you go to bed, because that tends to actually make your sleep makes you sleep less well, right? So maybe when you first get home from work or before you go to work, whatever kind of works for your schedule. But again, like, this is where, the discipline of these things can be hard, right? And having either a class to go to or an accountability buddy or some way of ensuring that you're exercising regularly in the winter, the research shows that it does help.
And I didn't look into it. I don't know if you looked into it more, looking at some of the more sort of extreme, like, comorbidities with other sort of psychiatric disorders, like, how much of it is because we also just don't have often as much social contact often in the winter. So, we're outside, we're with people, we see more people more often, and because we're also sort of homebound more, we just don't have sort of contact. And like, if I don't have those sort of social pressures in a good way, I know I can fall victim to, like, oh, it's cold, it's snowy, I just won't go to my car's cold, let me just stay in. If I didn't have, like, I need to get to the gym because somebody's going to give me grief if I don't show up, right? That's helpful.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. It's kind of similar to, we talk about the impact of smartphones on our health. And it sometimes it's not just what you're doing on the smartphone, but what you're not doing because you're on the smartphone. And I think that's exactly what you're referring to, right? Because it's cold and dark, I may not be going out as much, which means I'm not getting the socialization that's good for my mental health. I might not be exercising as much, which is good for my mental health. I'm not getting the daylight exposure, which helps regulate my sleep. And we know how sleep is so important. So all of these things absolutely feed into each other. So
and all those examples we were talking about of like semi-hibernation or semi-hibernation examples, those were in group settings. Like they were people doing it together as you bring to the animals. Like it wasn't people doing it by themselves. They were doing it in familial or group settings. So they still had, maybe they were only waking up for an hour, but they had people and they were cuddling with people and they had physical contact with people, and that probably mitigated some of those effects.
Yeah, I thought, I didn't really dig into this in terms of researching for this, but it crossed my mind that, Denmark, for example, is one of the happier countries in terms of ranked, happiness and well-being. It's also pretty dark, but yet they have much more of an emphasis on kind of community living spaces where, yes, you have your own room or whatnot, but there's kind of a shared kitchen area. There's a shared, and so.
That's a great point.
Yeah, so when we think of kind of condos in the U.S. and apartments, everything is self-contained in your own unit. And there's more of these like, well, yes, your bedroom is self-contained, but then the other things in terms of kitchen, living space, that's actually all community space. And so that might help counter some of the effects of isolation.
That's a great point.
So, okay, your challenge this week then is to kind of reflect on your own, we'll say, seasonal sensitivity. You may or may not be at the point where you call it seasonal affective disorder, or you might refer to it as winter blues, you might not. But decide for yourself, kind of after listening to this, are there any behavioral changes that would benefit you? I mean, Neil and I, of course, we're tinkerers, right? So we're always doing this. But I totally have this winter. Like I've definitely changed. I bought a decent light to put on my kitchen breakfast bar for breakfast. I'm more intentional about my evening routine, and this was all to help kind of regulate my sleep and energy level better in the winter months where I'm not getting outside as much as I like to, and I'm not getting the sun exposure. So reflect yourself. If you're feeling any of these winter blues, that's fine. It's normal. What might you do? And if it's serious, if you're really depressed, please seek help. Talk with someone, even if it's a friend or loved one about it. But reach out to someone.
Okay, that is it for this episode. Please subscribe to Thrivology Lab on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a comment or question on YouTube and we'll be sure to respond. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And if you have any questions or comments, or if there's a subject you'd like to hear us discuss, please reach out to thrivologylab@gmail.com. Thrive on, friends.
Thrive on.